Welcome back, Ty and That Guy. I'm Wes Chatham, and up there is Ty Franck. Say hello, Ty Franck.
Hello, Ty Franck.
You know, this is a very special one for us, so what are we talking about today?
We're talking about you pushing too many pencils.
That's Arnold says that, not the guy we're talking about.
But I'm giving you the Carl Weathers part. I'm giving you the part of honor.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, no, we're talking about the great Carl Weathers, who passed recently, and as soon as we heard that, we were like, we haven't talked about him yet much other than in the Predator episode, and it's a bummer that we waited until after his passing to talk about him. I mean, I don't want to wait that long for anybody I really like. I don't want to wait until after they're gone, but I mean, we got to do it now. We got to talk about. Well, we've
talked about him a lot. We haven't had
because he's in movies we love, but
yeah,
but we haven't talked about him as the focus of an episode.
Yeah. And I think
we got to talk about Denzel Washington before he dies, man.
Yeah. Well, I think he's along. We got to talk about Clint Eastwood before he dies, because I think he's 107 years old. So we got to get the.
He doesn't look a day over 190.
There was I'm watching The Good and Bad and the Ugly recently, and I'm like, Jesus Christ, this was in 1968.
Yeah. And
he was in his 40s.
Yeah.
I'm like, that motherfucker's been making movies for a long time.
It is weird though when you're young and you see these actors and you think they're old, and then you see them when you're old and they're still old. Did you ever watch The Sopranos?
Yeah.
That scene where Paulie goes to visit his mom at the old folks home and her friends are there, and he goes, I don't get it. When I was a little kid, you two were old ladies. Now I'm an old man and you're still just old ladies.
Yeah. You know what always blows my mind is, like, I followed this 80s Instagram. I don't remember which one it was, but what blows my mind is, like, they'll like show Ferris Bueller's parents and be like, they were 35. Right. You know, or something like, you know, people when you were growing up that thought they were so old. Like there'd be pictures like, this is what 35 looked like back then, or this is what 40 looked like back then. And you're like, Jesus Christ. But Carl, you know, I got to know Carl personally. I don't know if I've told you any of these stories, right? Have we talked about it before? You know, so we've talked a lot about how important Rocky was to us growing up and what big fans we were of the movie. I was doing a show called Barbershop, and John Ridley, the creator of Barbershop, was a big fan of Arrested Development. And he had on one of their directors, and I'm drawing a blank on her name right now, but she was good friends with Carl Weathers, and Carl Weathers was starting, really getting into directing. And so he was shadowing her one day, and I didn't know that he was shadowing that day. So we were doing a scene, and I heard his laughter coming from the other room, and I was like, it just, you know that booming voice, and that laugh. And then I heard his voice, and I'm like, what the fuck? And I walked around, and Carl Weathers stood up, and he was like, hey, nice to meet you. And he's a goddamn stallion of a man. You watch him in like Rocky 2. He's an Adonis.
I liked that they named his kid in the Creed movies Adonis Creed. Because that's a fitting name for a kid of Carl Weathers.
Well, get ready to be disgusted by him, because he's somebody that's touched by the gods, and you will hear this. You will get to, when I get to the end of the story, you will understand why. So he was on set every day, and like I always do, like, I love talking to him. He's very kind, very open, warm-hearted, and we would talk about his movies and the things that he's done. But at the time, I was living in Venice Beach, and then I would go train at Gold's Gym, and I was so excited because that's right when I got to LA. That show brought me to LA, so I was excited to go like where Arnold trains and everybody works out. And Carl Weathers was there every morning, and I was like, Carl, and he's like, Wes, and talking, and we would talk whatever. And this was his routine. He would get up in the morning. Early in the morning, go on the elliptical and read the New York Times, put it on the incline, and walk real fast and read. Now, he has the best body of anybody in the gym, right?
Right.
He walks on a treadmill.
Yeah, he's like 60 and he's still got a better body than everybody else.
He's like 60 and everybody's crushing it. Even if you go back to Predator, and you look at Predator, if you said, who do you want to look like? You'd be like, I want to look like Carl Weathers. And he's probably the only one that's not on steroids in the movie. and he's in there, and he might, if he's feeling, he might like lift a couple of weights or do something like that, but he's not a meathead. And then he would leave. And I would say, Carl, what? He goes, I'm not really that, and I'm like, where the fuck did this come from?
Right.
Is your dad Zeus? But he was just I loved being around him. He was very funny, very kind, very generous with his knowledge. He's been in the business for a long time, really understood drama. And one of my biggest disappointments is he was directing a film for the Air Force. I don't know if it was like an educate. I don't know exactly what the film was. It was like some kind of film that you watch within the Air Force. And so he was getting into directing. He was getting these jobs, and so he was doing a film for the Air Force, and he wanted me to be a part of the film. And he called my agent. I don't know if he did, but somebody called my agent, and I saw him at the gym, and I was like, "What's up, Carl?" And he goes, "Man," he said, "I called, or I don't know if it was him. Somebody called your agent. I wanted you to be a part of this film that we were doing." But my agent didn't know that Carl Weathers was directing it and that we were friends. And he was just like, he filtered out without, they kind of like, there's a lot of things, that you kind of filter. They kind of filtered out because he was like, oh, this is no money. And this is, okay, and so he never told me about it. And so, and I was so disappointed because I would have loved to like get to hang out with and work with him. I would have done anything that he was doing. So, I was really disappointed about that.
Yeah, but, there's people that you would work for free to work with.
Yes. Yeah. Oh, all the time. Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, I have a list of people that if they're like, hey, come work on this thing, we can't pay you. I'd be like, that's fine. I'll come work on it. It's no problem.
And then money. You're like, and by the way, Wes, in case you're wondering, you're not on that.
Yeah.
Just in case.
Dude, I've spent years working with you for free. You think I'm getting paid by this terrible podcast?
Oh, yeah. Dude, you make ones of dollars every year, okay?
I thought we gave all the money to Joseph.
Oh yeah. That's why Joseph's been so cocky lately. Money really went to his head.
Because he's got that ones of dollars that he's flashing at the strip club.
Yeah.
He's taking his paycheck and he's making it rain at the club.
And he keeps this ship afloat, I'll tell you that. That guy's got a good work ethic, Hopefully he'll make money off the other jobs that I get him, so then he, with more famous people. So Carl Weathers is one of those guys. He's got such presence and such power that I like him in everything he does, even if he's in a bad movie.
And he did a lot of bad movies.
Yep. Did you know, looking at the IMDb, are these all movies that you've seen? Because there's a lot of movies of his that I have not seen.
Yeah, I was just when we got started, I was looking at the IMDb for him and trying to figure out if I've seen everything on the list. I don't think I have. I mean, I've seen a lot of it, but he's got a lot of TV stuff that I haven't seen. Because he did a lot of TV work. And we'll talk about some of the TV work later, because I think one of the best things he ever did was a TV thing.
I think that what's interesting about his career is if you look all the way up to Predator, he was on the make. He was on the rise. And I think Action Jackson was his shot. Now,
Action Jackson really did some damage to his career, unfortunately. I would like to point out, though, that his first movie in 1973, do you know what it was?
No.
Magnum Force.
Was it really?
Yeah. I mean, he's basically a background extra. He plays one of the demonstrators at the rally. But that's the first time he was ever in a movie.
Do you remember seeing him in it?
No. I later somebody was like, "Oh yeah, did you know Carl Weathers is in Magnum Force?" I was like, "What?" And then I found a clip on YouTube of it's just like him, yelling. But yeah.
No, I did not know that. That's interesting.
And did a ton of TV. I mean, his early roles, he was in Good Times. I mean, we all watched Good Times. I grew up watching Good Times. He was in Kung Fu. He was in SWAT. Remember SWAT? He was in $6 Million Man. So he did a bunch of those sort of early TV series, and then after all that TV stuff, his first big movie role is Rocky. So he went from a guy who was like a background guy in a movie to a guy who did a bunch of guest parts on classic TV, like one episode parts.
Yeah.
And then he was fucking Apollo Creed.
He said that they didn't even want to see him for Apollo.
Yeah, he hadn't done anything.
He hasn't done anything. He said, I was nobody at the time. They didn't want to see him. He said, but I read the script and I knew like there's nobody better for me for this script.
And he's right, because you know what he had, what Carl Weathers had that he brought to that part is he had that cockiness that the great boxers have. That sort of, you walk in the room, you're cocky, you can beat anybody, that sort of unconscious arrogance that the really greats have. He brought
Muhammad
that
Ali
to that
created that persona, you know,
and
then,
Ali, the classic Ali persona, like I can beat anybody, I can beat any man in the ring. What Carl Weathers brought to the part was that, where he didn't believe anybody could step in the ring and beat him.
Yeah.
And that is, you could act that, but to exude it is different. And he exuded that arrogance.
So what they wanted to do in the movie is they basically wanted to take a boxer and teach him how to act, because the boxing was so important in the movie. But they couldn't find that. You know, they actually, I think they even had Joe Frazier come in. They had like some of the great champions, you know, come in and try to get them to do the thing.
Those guys are not good actors.
How do you know Joe Frazier's not a good actor?
Because I have watched interviews with all the great boxers, and they can barely get through an interview.
I bet Muhammad Ali would be a good actor.
Muhammad Ali before he got the brain damage.
Yeah.
And it really started showing up later in his life. Before that, I think he was a great actor, because the role of Muhammad Ali was a part he played. It wasn't him.
Yes, that's the point I'm making.
Yeah.
He created a fully formed character, Muhammad Ali, and he was great in it.
Yep.
He was great. And what people don't understand is like there's a lot of derivatives of him that are out there like trying to be Muhammad Ali.
They're not him.
And they're not him. Like Floyd Mayweather, like, you know, and Floyd Mayweather I think is one of the greatest boxers ever, but like he's just bad at playing that part, and it just makes you not like him. But Muhammad Ali, like there was always a little wink in what he was doing. He was aware of what he was doing. But here's another thing that will make you like Carl Weathers less is he lied about being a boxer. He doesn't have any experience in boxing. And when you watch him in Rocky, you're like, this motherfucker moves like Muhammad Ali.
Yeah.
You know, I could spot somebody that wasn't a boxer that's in the ring trying to box, but then you see Carl Weathers in there, and you're like, this guy fucking does the shuffle. He's throwing the jabs and the right hooks over. He moves like Muhammad Ali. He does the things. If he went that route, he probably would have been a world champion boxer.
Some people are just physically gifted in a way that has nothing to do with exercise or studying or anything. They're just physical freaks.
He played for the Oakland Raiders, and he was like, I was kind of into football, you know, growing up. He goes, I like the applause, I like the crowd and everything. It wasn't like most people that make it to the NFL where it was like their life's purpose. They're going to focus. Like Carl Weathers kind of dabbled in football and ended up playing for the
NFL.
Yeah, he dabbled in the NFL, ended up going to the Oakland Raiders. So he was just so gifted physically. And I think, and I saw him at the gym, and I was like, oh yeah, I'm going to see how Carl's gets after it. And then he's on the treadmill for 30 minutes reading his newspaper. Then he's like, all right, see ya. And I'm like, you motherfucker. You got like you.
Meanwhile, you're spending 2 hours on the weight bench.
It's like, what the fuck? But I think he was always he had a poetic heart. He was always an actor in heart. I think he always wanted to tell stories. You know, he just was gifted in many ways. You know, he had an embarrassment of riches in those.
Like if you could bottle his genetics, you could charge me any price. Like, like it's $10,000 a bottle to look like Carl Weathers. I'm like, all right, let me get my checkbook.
But when he went to read for Apollo, the reading wasn't going very well. And he tells this story, and Sly tells this story too. So at the time, Sylvester Stallone was not Sylvester Stallone.
No.
Yeah. So
Rocky created Sylvester Stallone.
Rocky created Sylvester Stallone. So they introduced Sylvester Stallone as the writer. And he came in, he's like, and they go, oh, here's the writer. You're going to be reading with the writer. You know, and he's like, okay, so I'm reading with the writer. So he was doing the scene. And at the end of the scene, he wanted to like really get after, but the scene just didn't hit for him. And he was frustrated by it. And he turned to the producers and said, if you get me a real actor, I can do a better job. True story. It confirmed by both sides.
That's awesome.
And Sly at that moment was like, that's Apollo Creed. That's what Apollo Creed would say. That kind of arrogance of like, you give me a real actor and I'll do it. So the scene didn't win him the part. It was him after like doing that thing that won the part. And I love that story. It's such a really cool story. Now to think about going from like the Oakland Raiders and then being kind of like a struggling TV actor and then doing Rocky, like the monster of a hit of that. Another great story is he was on the sets of The Streets of San Francisco. He was shooting a guest star there, and he was on the dock. And another person that was shooting a guest star walked up to him. They were sitting. He was getting his makeup on. They were sitting on the dock in San Francisco, overlooking the bay. And this other kid who was who was a guest star on the thing, walked up to him and said, "Hey, and Rocky was just starting like sneak previews and stuff like that. He goes, I just saw Rocky, and I think it's one of the best things that like it's going to be huge. It's one of the best things." And he's like, got really excited about that. And he goes, I just did a little like sci-fi film too. And he goes, and I think it's going to be big. I think it's going to be really big. And it was Mark Hamill. It was fucking Mark Hamill. And I'm like, you talking about
Mark
like.
was right. They were both big.
They were both right. They were both right. And Carl says, he says, people say you can't tell if it's going to be a hit or anything like that. He goes, I read the script and I knew it was going to be a hit. He goes, it was crazy because how the universe works, because I finally got 2 real offers. And I can't remember the other movie, but it was a forgettable movie, and Rocky. But it wasn't, the other movie actually had a studio, and because Rocky was an independent film, and the other movie had like marketing in the studio, and it was going to be supposed to be a bigger film. And he said, I just sat back and I said, what is the better script? What is the better material? One of them is gold and the other one's fool's gold. That's how he talked. And he chose the gold, and it became Rocky, and he became Apollo Creed.
Well, I mean, it's a great example of why you should pick the projects you do based on your love of the material rather than flashing light considerations, right? Because it's like, especially when you're in this business, as you know, agents are bad at sort of weeding out those sort of flashing light projects because they're looking at the financial considerations always, right? Because that's how they make their money. So they're always like, "Ooh, this is a big movie. It's with the studio. You're going to be able to get a really nice payday out of this. There's potential for sequels. This could become a franchise. You should definitely do this one." And they're not looking at like, is this material that you're going to fall in love with? This is a character you're going to fall in love with. Are you going to have real passion for this project? That's not what they're looking at. So if you're the person picking projects for yourself, I think the only thing you can do to ensure that you enjoy a career in this business is pick the projects you have passion for. They're going to bring you the variety. Here's the flashing lights one, and here's the one that's kind of small and unknown, but it's got a good script. Pick the one that you fall in love with. And the fact that Carl Weathers did that just makes me like him more. That he was like, I could make more money, or I could do this thing that I think is interesting, and he picked the interesting thing. Yeah.
And I think too, like you look at his IMDb up until Action Jackson. I think Action Jackson was the big studio swing for him,
and it's his first big miss.
Yeah, but a miss like this, there are moments because he was doing Saturday Night Live. He did, he went like there are moments where it's like we're going to take a big swing for this, and if they had the right director and they had the right script and the right character, he would be one of the biggest action stars of the 80s. Yeah. He would have been up there with Sly and Arnold.
He had the looks.
He had everything.
He had the talent.
He had the looks, the talent, the physicality, the intelligence. He had everything. And it's interesting how things can change like that. Like Rocky became what it became, and then he did and then Sylvester Stallone did Rambo. And so it was like lightning in the bottle 2 times in a row. Yeah. And then he was a made guy, right? Yep. So if Action Jackson would have took off, then Carl would have been a made guy. Once you become, there are the actors that are made guys that can survive a few bombs, but you got to have that one thing that connects that you become that guy.
Yeah, I mean, if he had gotten his version of Rambo,
where are you at on Action Jackson? I barely remember the movie.
So I watched it when it first came out, and like right when it first came out. I think I even went to the theater to see it because I was a Carl Weathers guy. Because I loved Rocky, and I was like, oh man, Apollo Creed, he's awesome. He's in an action movie, and it was trying the commercials for it, the trailers for it, were trying to ape the style of the 70s blaxploitation film. And I've talked about this before. I grew up on blaxploitation. I grew up in a largely black and Hispanic neighborhood when I was a kid. You know, Luther Vandross was on the radio, and 70s blaxploitation films were on the TV. And that's, so I mean, I was way too young the first time I saw a Pam Grier movie. But, you know, Pam Grier sort of changed my life when I'm like, 9 years old.
Pam Grier gives me feelings.
Oh yeah, she gave everybody feelings. But because of that, like I have a lot of they're not good movies, but I have great affection for that style of movie because I grew up watching it, and so you show me a Pam Grier style movie or a Jim Brown style movie, I'm in. Like I love it. So when the trailers came out for Action Jackson, I was like, oh, that's what they're trying to do. They're trying to do a Jim Brown movie, but with Carl Weathers as the Jim Brown part. And so I was excited by it. And then I went and saw it at the theater. And the problem with Action Jackson is it commits the worst crime that a movie can commit. It's boring. There's big action sequences in it, but there is no tension at any point in that movie. And so it just kind of feels like 80 minutes of some stuff that happens. And
what's the story?
I don't even remember what the story is. It's just,
but he's a cop.
Was he? I thought he was like a private eye.
No, he's a cop.
He's a cop. Okay. But yeah, it's just kind of, it's 80 minutes of some stuff that happens. And that's a script problem and a directing problem, right? I mean, it's, there's no tension in the story. They give him a bunch of like quips, like one-liners. And it just, I don't know. It just felt like all of the worst sins of 80s action movies in one movie.
You know what blows my mind? If you read scripts over and over and over and over and over, and then something like Action Jackson or something like that, where it's like, there's real money, there's a real studio, there's real marketing, there's everything behind it. And you're like, why would you pick this script? There's like, why would you, there's so many great scripts out there. Why would you pick this script to do this and to put everything into it?
Yeah, I don't know. I'm often baffled by that. And when I'm around people who've been working in the business a long time, and I have some friends who've been in the business a long time, and the thing I always ask them is, at what point in the process did you know you were making a bad movie? Because at some point, nobody starts out wanting to make a bad movie, right?
I think there are people that read the script and be like, this is a piece of shit, but
sure. But
there's that famous, can I tell a story or do you, go ahead.
Go ahead.
There's that famous David Mamet story when he was doing The Edge with Alec Baldwin and
yeah.
And so originally Robert De Niro was going to play Anthony Hopkins' part, and he had a table read with all the actors. And De Niro was there, and he was reading and they did the table read, and he read it, and after it was over with, he goes, I just I gotta really believe in it. I gotta really, it's a great script, it's a great part, but I just, if it doesn't move me and I don't believe in it and I feel like it's going to be great, I can't do it. And he's like, are you mad at me? I'm sorry. And he goes, no, I totally understand. You don't want to do it. Then you're backing out. I get it. And then he says, what are you doing next? He goes, oh, I'm doing this piece of shit. I'm doing this piece of shit movie. He just talked about how he has to believe in it and has to have honor and stuff like that. So yeah, I think there are some times when you know that if it's a piece of shit or whatever.
No, but I could see an actor feel that way, and I also, actors are not perfect judges of what a good script is either, because I've seen actors talk shit about projects that they're involved in that are actually good, where the script was good and the project was good, and they just didn't get it. And I mean, I've been lucky that I've worked with some smart actors. Not every actor is a genius, and sometimes an actor just doesn't understand what it is that the script is trying to do, and then it's not a good script. I'm like, no, it actually is a great script. You just don't get it,
or they're myopic in their focus of their part and their thing in it.
Exactly.
And, yeah.
So that doesn't always, but if you're a writer and a director, sometimes if you're doing work for hire, yeah, you'll get hired to do stuff you don't necessarily love. But if you're a writer or a director or both, and you're trying to put a project together and trying to get a movie made, nobody goes into that process saying, I just want to get a piece of shit movie made. So I'm always curious about the moment where you're working on something, you go, oh, this has gone off the rails. This is going to be terrible, but we're in it now. We're knee deep in this. We got to finish. We got to get to the other side. What that process feels like. And I've gotten a lot of different stories. And the most common aspect, I think, is where there's way too many cooks in the kitchen, right? And the minute that a lot of money gets put in, everybody turns into a cook, right? Mm-hmm. So you got some knucklehead at the studio who's now, because a lot of money's been put on the line, suddenly he's got a bunch of notes for you. He's got a bunch of things he wants you to do. You got the agencies get involved. You know, I mean, you're the big agency that you get an agency like CAA involved, and suddenly the agents have lots of requests and demands and things. And the people making the movie are trying to make a movie, and the actors, you get big name actors, and suddenly they all want rewrites because they want their character to be more like what they want it to be. Right. And the minute that happens, the minute that there is not a single creative vision for what the thing is going to be, you're done. You're dead meat at that point. And I think with a movie like this, I think it's too much money got thrown at it, too many voices, too many cooks in this kitchen, and it just feels like a quilt stitched together by a bunch of different stuff.
I feel like I would add to that is, you know, yes, I hear what you're saying, but also like too many cooks in the kitchen that don't know story or don't know what they're talking about. No, too many
cooks in the kitchen who have never cooked anything before.
That have never cooked anything because, you know, I just read Oliver Stone's book, and he is reading Ed Zwick's book that just came out, and he said, you know, if it's Roger Deakins, you know, or like, you know, if you surround yourself by people that really understand your vision, that are creative, then those cooks in the kitchen are always making things better. They're taking great ideas, but you got to close the door to some ideas if they haven't really grasped the vision that is saying. I mean, Ed Zwick told me in his book, he talks about how sometimes he gets notes and he feels like they didn't even read the script.
Right. Yeah. No, I have seen those notes. Where like you get a note and you're like, do they know the show that we're making? Yeah. Have they? Where sometimes you'll get a note and you'll be like, have you seen our show? Have you watched it?
He was talking about this executive that came to him. God, I wish I could remember. I think it was Courage Under Fire. Came to him and was like, hey, we got to hammer down. We have got to cut a scene. And he was like, okay, what scene would you want to cut? And I don't remember the scene. I think it was Courage Under Fire, but the scene that he chose was like the most important scene in the script. Like not even, it was like the emotional climax of the whole thing.
Right.
And he says, I'm going to pretend you didn't say that. Turn around and walk away. But I don't want to get off topic. What's the, do you want to do the top 5, Joseph?
No, I want to keep talking about Carl Weathers because the thing we haven't talked about. So let's talk a little bit about Carl Weathers' career. So he started out, he was a bit actor doing a lot of these little parts. Then he gets Rocky and has a moment there, right? As you said, he could have been a big action star.
Yeah.
Has sort of this failure with Action Jackson, unfortunately, and puts him back, like you know, you always talk about actor jail, kind of puts him back in actor jail.
Right.
Where he's doing bad movies. He's getting small parts in TV shows, but a thing happened to him where I think it became clear that Carl Weathers had a sense of humor about himself, and you start getting these amazing comedy parts.
Yeah,
for Carl Weathers, and my absolute favorite part he ever did was on Arrested Development, where he plays Carl Weathers.
Yeah,
he is as funny in Arrested Development so he's surrounded by comedic geniuses, right? I mean, that was Michael Cera's launching point. He's surrounded by comedic geniuses, and in every episode he's in, he's the funniest thing in that episode.
Yeah.
So that comeback Carl, where he's like playing the comedy version of Carl Weathers as an older guy, is my favorite Carl Weathers. I think he's fucking amazing at that.
And he was having such a strong third act with Star Wars. And also, so he was in Star Wars big hit show.
Yeah.
But he also became a director and directing some of these like amazing episodes that got a lot of acclaim within that. And he's somebody that didn't let ego destroy him. He pivoted and he learned how to have fun with himself and his persona. And that's why it worked so well, because I don't think you could have asked another action star at that time to do what Carl Weathers has did in Arrested Development.
No, I mean, there's a few, I think, and all my favorite actors do have a sense of humor about what they are, right, and who they are, and if you I think
Arnold. By the way, I think Arnold Schwarzenegger does. I think he has.
Arnold is definitely one of those guys. Yeah. I mean, he was on in the 90s. He was on Saturday Night Live doing Hans and Franz. Hans and Franz was specifically made to make fun of him, right? And he was on there being made fun of, in a skit that makes fun of him, and he was fine with it. He was. If you're an actor and you're not aware of that there are two versions of you, there's a public persona version of you that people think you are.
Yeah.
And that version has almost nothing to do with you. It is a creation of the audience, right?
Yeah.
And then there's you. And if you're not aware of that fact and able to poke fun at the public persona version of yourself and have a sense of humor about it, then I those are the people I don't like to work with.
Yeah. Yeah. Doing this podcast is pretty clear. Everybody knows I'm a dipshit. And I think that
I prefer the term jock meathead.
I think that
you're the guy that the nerds would steal your girlfriend in a Revenge of the Nerds movie.
All right, I made a blood oath with Joseph to get to do this to finish this at a certain time. So you want to do the top 5, or do you want to have anything else?
Actually, I have one thing, because you guys did not talk about his role as Chubbs in Happy Gilmore. Now, there is some trivia that I did not even realize. Do you know why Chubbs was missing a hand?
An alligator
got bit off by an alligator.
No, it was an inside joke reference to Dylan and Predator.
Okay. He gets his arm shot off. Yep.
The decision for him not to have a hand.
But doesn't he say it was a crocodile?
Yes, he does. But the inside, like the concept of it when they were, having that scene it was an inside joke when they were making the movie, is like, oh, wouldn't it be funny if you don't have a limb? So I that was probably my favorite in his, as you said, his third act.
And Happy Gilmore is one of the few Adam Sandler movies I actually like, because I generally hate his movies, but Happy Gilmore is pretty funny, and Carl Weathers as Chubbs is pretty great.
It's all in the hips. Alrighty, so we have best Carl Weathers performances.
For me, right, the tie, the 3-way tie for first place is Predator, because Dylan's great, Apollo Creed, because Apollo Creed is great, and Arrested Development, because Carl Weathers playing Carl Weathers is great.
The only thing I would add to that is, Apollo Creed is number 1. Wait, but are you? But the other Rocky 2, right? Rocky 2, or is
it's his performance as Apollo Creed.
As Apollo Creed.
Yeah, that makes sense. So we have 2 more: Toy Story, The Shield, Semi Tough, Psych, Mandalorian, Happy Gilmore, Force 10 from Around.
I mean, it's a voice part, but Combat Carl is pretty great.
Yeah, Combat. I like Combat. I like Combat Carl.
Chubbs or Grief?
I would be okay with Chubbs if that's where we go.
Chubbs. Yeah.
Chubbs is pretty great.
His performance is Grief, especially in, I think it was season 2, was the comedy that he brings to it, like how you just see how eager and light he made scenes.
I got to say, the thing I love about him on Arrested Development is they're doing a comedy version of the old actor, right? They're doing the comedy version of the guy who gets guest parts and all that stuff. And he's giving advice, like, here's what you do. You do that. If you get a part, here's how you can keep your per diem and all that stuff. What's funny about it is it's exaggerated, but every actor I know does the exact shit that he's talking about doing on Arrested Development, where you don't ever buy food so you can keep your per diem and you just eat like I remember one of our actors, every day he would get a lunch from the lunch truck, and he would get a second lunch put in styrofoam to take back for his dinner so that he didn't have to spend his per diem.
Are you talking about me?
No.
Because
I'm not talking about you. Did you do that too?
Yeah. I would do that when we were working late. When we were going doing late night. I would get because I never liked second meal.
Yeah.
So I would at lunch. I would eat lunch and then pack another lunch, and then when we're working late, because second meal was always something that you don't want to eat like late at night.
It was always like pizza or something.
Yeah, it was like pizza or hoagie, whatever.
Yeah.
So I would do that too. But I know who you're talking about. Because
every day he would do that. He would get 2 lunches,
and he would have 3 different brands of tea.
Yeah.
Delivered to him at the makeup trailer. Not just can I get a tea? 3 different. Because not 3 different brands in one cup, 3 different cups of tea that were different brands.
I thought. Are you talking about the guy who also got 3 different smoothies every day?
Yeah, I mean, I don't think there's more than one guy that gets 3 smoothies and 3 different cups of tea. In the thing.
But anyway, so what's funny about it is you watch Arrested Development. He's like. And everybody's laughing. Oh, that's so funny that he's doing this stuff. I'm like, every fucking actor I know does this shit that Carl Weathers is saying to do.
Yeah, it's so true. It is so true.
All right, let's look what the patrons have.
Well, obviously Dylan and Apollo Creed. See, they're going Mandalorian. And Action Jackson. Wow, because I'm surprised by that. Maybe they're doing that because it's like his one big starring role.
And also it's interesting because the movie didn't do well, but everybody, when you say Carl Weathers, they say Action Jackson.
Yeah. It was his big star turn.
Yeah. And you're like, Apollo Creed? you're gonna say Action Jackson?
Yeah, Predator and Rocky were tied.
Predator's one of the great sci-fi action movies of all time. Dylan is a great character. His on-screen chemistry with Schwarzenegger is fantastic.
Besides Arnold, he was my favorite guy of the group, growing up. And not to get body focused, but he was the body where I was like, I want to look like that, because it was like he looked athletic but also strong. Where the other guys were like completely muscle bound. You're
ghosting us, Dylan. Give away our position one more time. I'm gonna slip back here and bleed you, real quiet like.
Hey, how many times? How many like minutes of our podcast are dedicated to the male physique?
A lot. I think you and I are both great appreciators of an attractive man.
Alrighty.
You know what? That just tells you that we are comfortable in who we are, comfortable in our sexuality. We're not trying to prove anything to anyone.
You can't have a first class stash like this.
No.
And not be comfortable in your sexuality.
No. When you have a stash like that, you are saying, please stick something underneath this stash.
Well, you know what this stash is?
Please ride on this stash is what that stash is.
This stash is a rebellion against, my whole childhood. Like, what I was told was sexy was, Burt Reynolds, Tom Selleck, the Marlboro Man. And I'm like, oh, okay, all right.
All great stashes.
Yeah, all great stashes. When I get up there, that's what I'm going to. And then you get there and it's like, ooh, stashes are gross. I'm like, fuck you. I've been lied to my whole life, and I want a mullet and I want a mustache right now.
I still think that the mullet, the shaved side mullet, and the big Fu Manchu mustache in a Camaro is the height of male. It's the height of masculinity.
Yeah.
The height of American masculinity.
Your testosterone goes up 10 points.
Everybody you walk past, their testosterone goes up 10 points.
Even if they're female.
Yeah, no. Every woman you walk past is pregnant. That's the height. That's as good as it gets.
Thank you guys for hanging out and celebrating Carl Weathers with us. We love you.
We're going to miss Carl Weathers, man. We're going to
miss him. He was one of the greats, a wonderful, kind, beautiful man.
Emphasis on beautiful.
Say goodbye, Ty.
Goodbye, Carl.